The massive alien fleet stretched across the void like a constellation of death. 300 warships of the Zephyrian Empire hung in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls gleaming with the cold light of distant stars. Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the sensor readings with growing satisfaction. For 5,000 years, the Zephyrians had ruled this sector of the galaxy. Their technology was ancient, refined through millennia of conquest and perfection. Their ships could slice through space-time itself, their weapons could turn entire worlds to glass, and their shields could withstand the fury of a star-going supernova. They were the apex predators of known space, and nothing had ever challenged their supremacy. Nothing until today. The human ship appeared on their sensors like a ghost materializing from the depths of space. It was alone, impossibly alone against their entire battle fleet. Admiral Kextar's four eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. The vessel was massive, easily twice the size of his own flagship, but its design was crude and primitive compared to their sleek crystalline architecture. Analysis, Science Officer Velmok, Kextar commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. Velmok's tentacles danced across the bioneural interface, pulling data from their most advanced scanning systems. Admiral, the vessel appears to be constructed primarily of refined metallic alloys. Primitive fusion reactors detected. Energy signatures suggest magnetic plasma containment systems. Technology level approximately 3,000 years behind our current capabilities. A ripple of amusement passed through the bridge crew. Several officers made the clicking sound that passed for laughter among their species. Kextar himself allowed his mandibles to spread in what might have been considered a smile. 3,000 years, he repeated, savoring the words. And they dare to face us with such antiquated technology. The communications officer, a young Zephyrian named Thexmol, looked up from his station. Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from the human vessel. Put it through. The main view screen shimmered and resolved into the image of a human male. He appeared to be middle-aged by their species standards, with graying hair and weathered features that spoke of long years in space. His uniform was simple and functional, lacking the ornate decorations that marked rank among civilized species. Behind him, the bridge of his ship was visible, all angles and harsh lighting, with primitive displays and manual controls that belonged in a museum. This is Captain Marcus Chun of the UES Indomitable, the human said, his voice steady and calm. You are in violation of the Terran exclusion zone established by the Galactic Accords of 2387. You have 30 minutes to withdraw your forces, or we will be forced to take action. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion erupted in the clicking sounds of Zephyrian laughter. Admiral Kextar raised one of his primary arms, and silence returned immediately. Human, Kextar said, his voice dripping with condescension. I am Admiral Kextar of the Zephyrian Empire. We have ruled this sector for 5 millennia while your species was still learning to make fire. Your primitive vessel cannot hope to stand against the might of 300 ships of the line. I offer you this chance to surrender now, and we will make your deaths quick. Captain Chin's expression didn't change. Admiral, this is your final warning. You have 29 minutes and 45 seconds to withdraw. The transmission ended. Kextar stared at the blank screen for a moment, then slowly turned to face his tactical officer. Remthal, what is the human ship's weapons complement? Remthal consulted his instruments, his expression growing confused. Sir, our scans detect conventional kinetic projectile launchers, basic laser arrays, and what appear to be primitive nuclear warheads. No exotic matter weapons, no quantum disruptors, no gravitic manipulators. It's as if they're still fighting with stone knives and bare skins. Shield strength. Electromagnetic barriers only, sir. No phase variance, no temporal displacement. Our main guns could punch through their defenses with a single shot. Kextar nodded slowly. This was almost too easy. Perhaps the humans were counting on some sort of bluff, hoping their reputation might save them. It was true that humanity had gained a certain notoriety in recent years for their stubbornness and unpredictability, but courage without technology was just another word for stupidity. Signal the fleet, Kextar commanded. Battle formation Alpha 7. We will demonstrate to these primitives what 5,000 years of technological advancement can accomplish. Across the void, the Zephyrian fleet began its deadly dance. Ships that had been traveling in loose formation suddenly snapped into precise geometric patterns, their movements coordinated by quantum-entangled communication networks. Energy signatures flared as weapon systems came online, painting space with the rainbow hues of exotic matter containment fields. The human ship, meanwhile, hung motionless in space. It made no attempt to flee, showed no sign of powering weapons or raising additional defenses. It simply waited. On the bridge of the UES Indomitable, Captain Marcus Chun watched the alien fleet maneuver with the calm detachment of a man who had seen too many battles to be impressed by pretty formations. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency that marked veteran spacers. No one seemed particularly concerned about the odds they faced. "Tactical, what's our status?" Chen asked quietly. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim looked up from her station, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of her displays. "All systems nominal, Captain. Weapons are charged and ready. Aegis is online and fully integrated. Engineering. Fusion plants are running hot and clean," came the reply from Chief Engineer Rodriguez over the comm. "Inertial dampeners at maximum efficiency. We're ready for whatever you need, sir." Chen nodded and settled back in his captain's chair. It was a simple thing, built for function rather than ceremony, unlike the ornate command thrones favored by most alien species. But it had carried him through 17 years of deep space exploration and more battles than he cared to remember. "Time to deadline?" 15 minutes, 30 seconds, Kim reported. "Very well. Signal the Admiralty. Tell them we have made contact with a Zephyrian battle fleet and are preparing to enforce the exclusion zone." The communications officer, a young ensign named Patterson, turned in his seat. "Sir, should we request reinforcements?" Chen almost smiled. "Negative, ensign. We can handle this." Light years away, in the fortress-like structure of Terra Defense Command, Admiral Elena Vasquez received the transmission and felt her stomach tighten. She had known Marcus Chun for 20 years, had served with him during the Centauri campaign and the Siege of New Geneva. He was one of the best captains in the fleet, but even Marcus couldn't work miracles. 300 ships. Even with the Indomitable's capabilities, those were impossible odds. "Signal the 4th Fleet," she commanded her aide. "Emergency deployment to Grid 77 Alpha. Maximum burn. Admiral, at best speed. The 4th Fleet won't reach Captain Chen's position for 18 hours. Vasquez closed her eyes. 18 hours. Marcus would be fighting alone for 18 hours against the most advanced military force in known space. "Do it anyway," she said quietly. "And pray we're not too late." Back in the battle zone, Admiral Kextar watched the chronometer count down with growing impatience. The human ship still hadn't moved, hadn't even bothered to launch reconnaissance drones or deploy defensive satellites. Were they paralyzed with fear, or did they truly believe their primitive technology could stand against Zephyrian might? 5 minutes until their deadline expires, Thexmol reported. "Excellent. Remthal, target the human vessel. We will give them a demonstration of our capabilities." "Sir, should we disable them first? Their technology might be worth studying." Kextar's mandibles clicked in amusement. "There is nothing their primitive minds could teach us. Fire at will." The first shot came from the Eternal Dominion itself, a coherent beam of exotic particles that could slice through the armor of any known vessel like a knife through flesh. It struck the human ship's forward shields, and Kextar blinked in confusion. The beam simply vanished, absorbed into the human vessel's defensive grid, without so much as a flicker of feedback energy. "What happened?" he demanded. Remthal stared at his instruments in bewilderment. "Sir, the beam was completely absorbed. No reflection, no dispersion, no overload cascade. It just disappeared. Impossible. Fire again, full power." This time, 3 ships fired simultaneously. Beams of energy that should have been capable of cracking a moon struck the human vessel from different angles. Once again, they simply vanished into the ship's defensive field. Captain Chen stood and smoothed down his uniform. Around him, status lights showed the Aegis system functioning exactly as designed, drinking in the alien energy weapons and converting their power to fuel the Indomitable Zone systems. "Well, Gentlemen, he said calmly, I believe our 30 minutes are up. Tactical, you may commence firing. The human ship's response was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever seen. Instead of exotic energy beams or quantum torpedoes, the Indomitable fired simple kinetic projectiles. Chunks of dense metal accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed by magnetic launchers that belonged to an earlier age of warfare. But these weren't ordinary kinetic rounds. Each projectile was guided by sophisticated AI systems, and, more importantly, each one carried within its core a small piece of technology that had taken humanity 50 years to perfect: compressed dark matter. The first round struck a Zephyrian light cruiser amidships. For a brief instant, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the ship simply ceased to exist, collapsing in on itself as the dark matter created a localized gravitational anomaly that crushed the vessel down to a point smaller than an atom. Kextar watched in horror as ship after ship in his fleet was simply erased from existence. The humans fired with methodical precision, each shot perfectly aimed, each target eliminated before it could even register the incoming threat. Evasive maneuvers, he screamed. All ships, scatter pattern Delta. Return fire. But it was too late. The Zephyrians had spent 5,000 years perfecting weapons that relied on exotic energy, forgetting the fundamental lesson that mass and velocity could be just as devastating. Their shields, designed to deflect or absorb energy weapons, were useless against simple kinetic impact. Within 10 minutes, half the Zephyrian fleet was gone. Ships that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were being destroyed by what amounted to sophisticated bullets fired from a vessel they had dismissed as primitive. Sir, Velmok called out, his voice high with panic. I'm detecting massive energy buildup in the human vessel. Power levels are off the scale. On the Indomitable, Lieutenant Commander Kim smiled grimly as she brought the main gun online. It was a weapon that officially didn't exist, a prototype that pushed the boundaries of what human engineering could accomplish. While the aliens had spent millennia perfecting energy weapons, humans had taken a different path. Main gun charged and ready, she reported. Target the flagship, Chen ordered. Let's end this. The weapon that fired from the Indomitable's forward section wasn't a beam or a projectile. It was a focused burst of gravitational waves, a ripple in space-time itself that propagated at the speed of light and carried the destructive force of a collapsing star. The Eternal Dominion, pride of the Zephyrian fleet, didn't have time to scream before it was torn apart at the subatomic level. Admiral Kextar and his crew of over 10,000 were reduced to their component atoms in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The surviving ships of the Zephyrian fleet, seeing their flagship destroyed by an incomprehensible weapon, broke formation and fled in all directions. Some tried to surrender, broadcasting desperate pleas for mercy in a dozen different languages. Others simply activated their emergency jump drives and vanished into hyperspace, carrying tales of terror back to their home worlds. Captain Chen watched them go with the satisfaction of a job well done. The exclusion zone would remain inviolate, and the galaxy would learn once again that humanity was not to be underestimated. Status report, he said calmly. All systems nominal. Minor drain on the dark matter reserves, but nothing significant. Aegis performed flawlessly. Casualties? None, sir. Chen nodded and returned to his captain's chair. Just another day at the office for the crew of the UES Indomitable. In the depths of space, the wreckage of 300 of the galaxy's most advanced warships drifted silent and cold, testament to the danger of underestimating an opponent. The Zephyrian Empire would remember this day for generations to come, and the name, human, would be spoken in hushed whispers throughout their territory. But, for now, there was only silence, and the steady pulse of the Indomitable's engines as she resumed her patrol of the Terran exclusion zone, ready for whatever threat might come next. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened just 18 hours after the destruction of the Zephyrian fleet. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the Great Crystalline Dome on Nexus Prime, their voices creating a cacophony of outrage, fear, and disbelief that echoed off the chamber's walls. Ambassador Velnoth of the Zephyrian Empire stood at the central podium, his normally pristine robes torn and stained. He had been aboard one of the few ships to escape the massacre, and The trauma of watching his people's greatest fleet destroyed in minutes still showed in his trembling limbs and dilated pupils. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice cracking with emotion, "what happened in the Terran exclusion zone was nothing short of genocide. 300 ships, the pride of our empire, were destroyed without warning by human forces using weapons of mass destruction." A ripple of concerned murmurs passed through the assembly. The Antaran delegate, her insectoid features twitching with agitation, raised one of her forearms. "Ambassador Velnoth, are you certain these weapons were human in origin? Such devastating capability seems inconsistent with our intelligence on their technological level." "I was there," Velnoth snapped, his composure finally cracking. "I watched a single human ship erase Admiral Kekstar's flagship from existence. Our most advanced vessels, ships that have never known defeat, were destroyed by primitives using kinetic weapons and gravitational anomalies." The Corvin representative, a being of living energy contained within an environmental suit, pulsed with skeptical colors. "Kinetic weapons against energy shields? That's impossible. Even a child knows that kinetic projectiles are useless against modern defensive systems." "That's what we thought," Velnoth replied bitterly. "We were wrong." High Chancellor Zhuaxmar of the Hegemony called for order with a sharp crack of his ceremonial staff. The ancient reptilian had presided over the council for over 2 centuries and had seen the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations. His cold eyes studied the Zephyrian ambassador with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating prey. "These are serious accusations, Ambassador Velnoth. You claim that a single human vessel destroyed an entire battle fleet. Such claims require evidence." Velnoth activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as tactical recordings showed the UES indomitable, methodically destroying ship after ship of the Zephyrian fleet. The images were grainy and distorted. Most of the recording equipment had been destroyed in the battle, but they clearly showed vessels simply ceasing to exist when struck by human weapons. "By the 7 moons of Altair," whispered the Deltarian delegate. "What kind of weapons are those?" "Unknown technology," Velnoth replied. "Our science division has analyzed the recordings for 17 hours straight. The kinetic projectiles appear to contain some form of exotic matter that creates localized gravitational anomalies. Their main weapon generates focused gravitational waves that disrupt matter at the subatomic level." The chamber erupted in frightened chatter. Gravitational weapons were theoretical constructs that most species considered impossible to build. The energy requirements alone should have been beyond the capability of any known civilization, let alone the humans who still used primitive fusion reactors. Ambassador Thy Sestal of the Mercantile Union slithered forward on her serpentine lower body, her scales shimmering with anxiety patterns. "This changes everything. If the humans possess such weapons, no fleet in the galaxy is safe. That's precisely why we must act," High Chancellor Zhuaxmar declared. "The human expansion has been a concern for decades. They reproduce too quickly, spread too far, and now we discover they possess weapons that make our own military forces obsolete. They represent an existential threat to the established order." Admiral Korthvex of the Dominion military forces stood slowly, his massive frame dwarfing even the oversized podium. The old warrior bore scars from a dozen campaigns and commanded respect throughout known space. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I have reviewed the tactical data," he rumbled. "The human vessel's capabilities are indeed formidable. However, we must not panic. One ship, no matter how advanced, cannot stand against the combined might of the entire galaxy. I propose we assemble a coalition fleet, the largest armada ever conceived, and crush this human threat before it can spread." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Zephyrians might have been humiliated, but they were only one empire among many. Surely the combined fleets of 47 civilizations could overwhelm even the most advanced human technology. The Quellian delegate, a being of pure thought inhabiting a mechanical body, raised its artificial hand. "Admiral Korthvex speaks wisdom. However, we must consider the strategic implications. The humans have established this exclusion zone around their territory. If we attack en masse, We may be the ones seen as aggressors by neutral parties. The humans gave warning, added the Nexari representative reluctantly. Their captain offered the Zephyrian fleet 30 minutes to withdraw before opening fire. Technically, they were defending their declared territory. Defending? Velnotha's voice rose to a shriek. They murdered 300,000 of my people. That wasn't defense, it was slaughter. High Chancellor Zyxmar raised his staff again. Enough. The facts are these. The humans possess weapons technology that threatens the stability of the galaxy. They have demonstrated a willingness to use these weapons with lethal force. And they have claimed a vast region of space as their exclusive domain. This cannot be allowed to stand. But what if they have more ships like this one? Asked the Palaxian delegate, her crystalline voice chiming with worry. What if this wasn't their most advanced vessel? The question hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. If the humans had an entire fleet of such ships, conventional military action would be suicide. Admiral Korthvex's scarred features hardened. Then, we must strike before they can bring such a fleet to bear. Intelligence suggests the humans have only a dozen vessels of this class. If we move quickly, with overwhelming force, we can destroy them before they become unstoppable. High Chancellor Zyxmar nodded slowly. Very well. I call for a formal vote. All in favor of authorizing military action against the human threat. Hands, claws, tentacles, and appendages of every description rose throughout the chamber. The vote was not unanimous. Several delegates abstained, and the pacifist Zenarian representative voted against. But the majority was clear. Motion carried, Zyxmar announced. Admiral Korthvex, you have full authority to assemble a coalition fleet and eliminate the human threat. What do you require? The Admiral's predatory smile would have frightened children of a dozen species. Everything, Chancellor. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier we can muster. The humans may be clever, but they are still just one species against the entire galaxy. 3 days later, the largest military force in galactic history began to assemble in the neutral system of Kalos Prime. Ships arrived by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Sleek Antaran battlecruisers flew alongside massive Corvin dreadnoughts. Deltarian carriers launched clouds of fighter craft, while mercantile Union destroyer squadrons provided escort. The sight was awe-inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. 10,000 ships representing the cream of galactic military technology, all united in a single purpose, the destruction of humanity. On his flagship, the massive super dreadnought Eternal Vengeance, Admiral Korthvex reviewed the fleet disposition with grim satisfaction. Never before had so many civilizations cooperated on such a scale. Whatever weapons the humans possessed, they could not hope to stand against such overwhelming force. His chief of staff, Colonel Waxmoth, consulted his tactical displays nervously. Sir, intelligence reports suggest the humans have been monitoring our fleet buildup. Their spy networks are more extensive than we anticipated. Good, Korthvex rumbled. Let them see what awaits them. Perhaps they will surrender before we are forced to destroy them all. Sir, what if they don't? What if they fight? Korthvex turned his massive head to stare at his subordinate. Then, they will learn the price of challenging the established order. No single species, no matter how advanced, can stand against the united galaxy. But, even as he spoke the words, a nagging doubt gnawed at the back of his mind. The recordings from the Zephyrian engagement had been disturbing. The casual efficiency with which the human ship had destroyed 300 advanced vessels suggested capabilities far beyond anything in their intelligence reports. Meanwhile, in the depths of human space, emergency meetings were taking place in hidden facilities and secure chambers. The attack on the Zephyrian fleet had been a calculated move, designed to send a message to the galaxy. But that message had been interpreted as a threat rather than a warning. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood before a holographic display showing the massive alien fleet assembling at Kalos Prime. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. More ships than humanity had ever built in their entire history, all aimed at their destruction. Status report, she commanded. Captain Torres of Naval Intelligence stepped forward, his face grim. 10,000 confirmed vessels, Admiral. Possibly more arriving every hour. Every major power in the galaxy has contributed ships to this coalition. Capabilities? Varied, but all advanced. We're looking at enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. Vasquez nodded slowly. This was what they had feared, what the computer models had predicted. Show too much strength too quickly, and the galaxy would unite against them. Show too little, and they would be seen as easy prey. What about our own forces? 17 ships of the Indomitable class are operational and ready for deployment. The Prometheus and her sister ships are still in final testing phases. 17 ships against 10,000. On paper, it was hopeless. But then, again, the Zephyrians had thought 300 ships was more than enough. Signal Captain Chun, Vasquez ordered. He's about to get some company. The UES Indomitable hung in space exactly where she had been when the battle began, seemingly unchanged. Her crew continued their routine duties with the calm professionalism that marked veteran spacers. But, beneath the surface, everyone knew what was coming. Captain Shin stood on his bridge, studying the tactical display that showed the massive enemy fleet beginning to move from Kalos Prime. Their destination was obvious, the Terran exclusion zone, and, specifically, his ship. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Kim reported, long-range sensors detect multiple hyperspace signatures inbound. The entire coalition fleet is heading our way. Time to arrival? 6 hours at current velocity. Chin nodded and turned to his communications officer. Signal the fleet. Tell them it's time. Across human space, 16 other ships identical to the Indomitable received the message and began their silent approach to the battleground. They moved not through normal space, but through hyperspace corridors that would bring them to the fight at precisely the right moment. As the alien coalition fleet closed the distance to the exclusion zone, Admiral Korthvex felt his confidence returning. His ships outnumbered the humans by an almost absurd margin. Whatever tricks they had used against the Zephyrians, they could not possibly work against such overwhelming odds. Signal the fleet, he commanded. Full battle formation. We will end this quickly and decisively. The display before him showed 10,000 ships arranging themselves in a complex, three-dimensional formation designed to maximize their firepower while minimizing their vulnerability. It was beautiful in its precision, a symphony of destruction orchestrated on an interstellar scale. Sir, his sensor officer reported, the human vessel is maintaining position. Still no sign of reinforcements. Korthvex allowed himself a moment of disappointment. He had hoped the humans would at least try to run, perhaps lead them on a chase through their territory. Instead, they seemed content to die where they stood. How very unlike their reputation for cunning and stubbornness. Admiral, the sensor officer's voice cracked with sudden alarm. Multiple contacts materializing throughout the formation. Ships decloaking directly among our forces. Korthvex spun to stare at the tactical display, and his blood turned to ice. Scattered throughout his carefully arranged fleet, 17 human vessels had appeared as if from nowhere. They hadn't been detected approaching, hadn't shown up on any sensors until the moment they opened fire. And when they opened fire, the galaxy's greatest military force began to die. The first volley from the 17 human ships was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Each vessel fired simultaneously, their weapons systems synchronized through quantum-entangled communication networks that operated outside normal spacetime. The result was devastating beyond imagination. Admiral Korthvex watched in paralyzed horror as entire sections of his fleet simply vanished. Not destroyed, not disabled, vanished. Ships that had been there one moment were gone the next, leaving only fading energy signatures and expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Report, he bellowed, his voice cracking with the strain. Sir, we're taking massive casualties across all sectors, his tactical officer stammered. The human vessels are using some kind of directed gravitational weapons. Our shields are useless against them. On the bridge of the UES Indomitable, Captain Chun watched the alien formation begin to collapse as panic spread through their ranks. Ships that had been maintaining perfect formation suddenly broke away in all directions, their commanders too terrified to maintain discipline. Status of the fleet? He asked calmly. All ships reporting nominal function, Lieutenant Commander Kim replied. Prometheus is experiencing minor fluctuations in her dark matter containment, but nothing critical. Chin nodded. The Prometheus-class ships were still experimental, their dark matter cores more unstable than the proven technology aboard his vessel. But they were holding together, and that was what mattered. Continue firing. Target the command vessels first. The human strategy was simple but effective. Rather than engaging the enemy fleet in a traditional battle, they had used their stealth capabilities to position themselves throughout the alien formation. Each ship operated independently, striking at command and control vessels before moving on to high-value targets. The aliens' numerical advantage meant nothing when they couldn't coordinate their response. Without proper command structure, 10,000 ships became 10,000 separate targets, each one vulnerable to destruction by weapons they couldn't understand or defend against. Captain Sarah Mitchell of the UES Vengeance watched her targeting computer identify another alien command ship, this one a massive Corvin dreadnought bristling with exotic energy weapons. The ship's commander was broadcasting frantically on all frequencies, trying to rally the scattered fleet back into some semblance of order. "Eliminate that dreadnought," she ordered. The Vengeance's main gun fired, sending a focused pulse of gravitational waves racing across space at the speed of light. The Corvin vessel's shields flared as they attempted to dissipate the attack, but gravitational waves could not be stopped by energy barriers. The dreadnought collapsed in on itself like a star going supernova in reverse, its matter compressed into a point of infinite density before winking out of existence. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out again and again. The Deltarian supercarrier Infinite Wing, pride of their stellar navy, was torn apart by dark matter projectiles that punched through its armored hull as if it were paper. The Antaran battlecruiser Eternal Glory tried to ram the UES Retribution, only to watch in amazement as the human ship's Aegis defensive system absorbed the kinetic energy of the impact and converted it to power for its own weapons. Admiral Korthvex found himself in the unprecedented position of commanding a fleet that was being systematically annihilated by a vastly inferior force. His tactical displays showed disaster after disaster as his ships fell to weapons that violated everything he thought he knew about space combat. "Signal the reserve fleet," he commanded desperately. "Emergency, jump to our position. All ships, converge on Grid 77 Alpha." His communications officer worked frantically at his station. "Sir, I'm trying, but the humans are jamming our quantum channels. The reserve fleet isn't receiving our signals." "Impossible. Our communications are instantaneous across any distance." "Not anymore, sir. The human ships are generating some kind of quantum interference field. It's disrupting entangled particle pairs faster than they can be re-established." Korthvex stared at the tactical display, watching his life's work crumble around him. 40 years he had spent building this fleet, gathering allies, preparing for the day when the galaxy would need to unite against a common threat. He had never imagined that threat would be so far beyond their ability to combat. On the UES Indomitable, Captain Chun received a priority transmission from Admiral Vasquez on Earth. Her face appeared on his personal communication screen, and he could see the strain in her features. "Marcus, how are you holding up out there?" "No problems so far, Admiral. We've eliminated approximately 30% of their command structure. Resistance is becoming increasingly disorganized." "Good. What's the status of the experimental weapons?" Chen glanced at his tactical display. "The dark matter projectiles are performing within expected parameters. The gravitational wave generators are exceeding specifications by 12%. The Aegis system is functioning perfectly. We're actually gaining energy from their attacks." Vasquez nodded grimly. "And the Prometheus-class ships?" "Minor issues with containment stability, but nothing critical. Captain Morrison reports that his ship's dark matter core is running hot, but still within acceptable limits." "Very well. Marcus, I'm authorizing use of Protocol 7. Chen felt his blood chill. Protocol 7 was the ultimate weapon in humanity's arsenal, something so terrible that it had only been tested once, in the deepest reaches of empty space. The decision to use it was not made lightly. "Admiral, are you certain?" "The collateral damage dash. I'm certain, Marcus. End this now, before more ships arrive to reinforce them." The transmission ended, leaving Chen staring at his reflection in the dark screen. Protocol 7. He had hoped never to hear those words spoken in anger. "Sarah," he called to his tactical officer. Kim looked up from her station, her face pale. She had heard the conversation and understood what was coming. "Aye, sir. Signal the fleet. All ships implement Protocol 7 on my mark." Throughout the human fleet, 17 captains received the same order and felt the same chill. What they were about to do would change the nature of warfare forever. There would be no going back after this. The alien fleet was still trying to regroup when the human ships suddenly stopped firing. For a brief moment, hope flickered in the hearts of the surviving alien commanders. Perhaps the primitive humans had exhausted their ammunition or their weapons had overheated. Then, the human ships began to glow. It started as a subtle luminescence, barely visible against the backdrop of space. But it grew rapidly, intensifying until each human vessel blazed like a miniature star. The energy readings were off the scale, climbing to levels that should have destroyed any known ship. On the bridge of the Eternal Vengeance, Admiral Korthvex watched the display with growing dread. "What are they doing?" he whispered. His science officer, a Quellian whose artificial body was trembling with fear, looked up from his instruments. "Sir, they're venting their dark matter cores directly into normal space. The gravitational distortions are increasing exponentially. That's suicide. No ship can survive direct exposure to uncontained dark matter. The human ships aren't just surviving it, sir. They're controlling it." Across the battle space, reality began to bend. The 17 human ships had become focal points of gravitational distortion so intense that they warped space-time itself. Stars in the distance appeared to shift position as light bent around the massive gravitational fields. And then, as one, the human fleet fired. But this wasn't the targeted fire they had been using throughout the battle. This was something far more terrible. Each ship released its entire dark matter reserve in a single, coordinated burst. 17 streams of pure gravitational force reached out across space, converging on the center of the alien formation. The result was apocalyptic. Where the streams intersected, space itself began to tear. A rift opened in the fabric of reality, a wound in the universe that sucked in light, matter, energy, everything. The alien ships caught in the convergence zone didn't have time to scream before they were pulled into the void and crushed out of existence. But the weapon didn't stop there. The gravitational collapse spread outward like a wave, catching ship after ship in its inexorable pull. Vessels that tried to flee found their engines powerless against the crushing force of artificial gravity. Even ships that jumped to hyperspace found themselves dragged back into normal space and torn apart. In less than 5 minutes, the greatest military force in galactic history was gone. 10,000 ships and their crews, the pride of 47 civilizations, had been erased from existence by weapons that turned the laws of physics themselves into tools of destruction. Admiral Korthvex's flagship was one of the last to go. As the Eternal Vengeance was pulled inexorably toward the expanding gravitational anomaly, he stood on his bridge and watched his life's work disappear into the void. His crew had long since abandoned their posts, either dead at their stations or fled to escape pods that would never clear the gravitational field. "So this is how it ends," he said to no one in particular. "Not with glory or honor, but with forces beyond our comprehension." The ship's hull began to buckle as tidal forces tore it apart. Through the failing viewports, Korthvex could see the human ships withdrawing to a safe distance, their forms no longer glowing with the terrible energy they had unleashed. They had survived their own weapons somehow, their alien technology protecting them from forces that would have destroyed any other vessel. As the Eternal Vengeance crossed the event horizon of the artificial black hole, Admiral Korthvex had one final, terrible realization. The humans hadn't just defeated the galaxy's greatest fleet, they had demonstrated a level of technological sophistication that made every other species look like children playing with toys. The galaxy had united to destroy what they saw as a primitive threat. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to weaponize the fundamental forces of the universe itself. The last thing Korthvex saw was the peaceful blue-white glow of the UES Indomitable's engines as Captain Chen's ship began its journey back to human space. They were leaving, their work done, their message delivered with brutal clarity. Humanity was not to be challenged. Ever. The artificial black hole collapsed in on itself moments later, leaving behind only empty space and a few scattered pieces of debris. Of the 10,000 ships that had come to destroy humanity, nothing remained but radiation and the fading echoes of their final transmissions. Captain Shin stood on his bridge and watched the last traces of the enemy fleet disappear into nothingness. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency to shut down the dark matter systems and return their ship to normal operation. No one celebrated. What they had done was necessary, but it wasn't something to take pride in. Signal Admiral Vasquez, Shin ordered. Tell her the exclusion zone is secure. Aye, sir. As the Indomitable and her sister ships began their journey home, the galaxy watched and trembled. The age of human expansion was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 months after the Battle of the Kalos Convergence, as historians would later call it, the galaxy was a very different place. The news of what had happened spread like wildfire through every civilized world, carried by the few survivors who had managed to escape in the first moments of the battle. On the crystalline world of Zephyr Prime, Emperor Thexdal stood before the throne of eternal wisdom, reading reports that would have been unbelievable just months earlier. His empire, which had ruled its sector for 5 millennia, was in chaos. Entire star systems were declaring independence, their governors no longer confident in the Empire's ability to protect them from the human threat. Your Imperial Majesty, his chief advisor whispered, the Outer Rim colonies are requesting permission to negotiate separate peace treaties with the humans. They fear another punitive expedition. Thexdal's 4 eyes closed in resignation. The Zephyrian Empire had survived the rise and fall of a dozen other galactic powers, weathered wars that had consumed entire star clusters, and emerged from every conflict stronger than before. But they had never faced anything like humanity. Grant them permission, he said finally, and begin drafting our own terms of surrender. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. The Antaran Collective, the Corvin Dominion, the Mercantile Union. Every major power was scrambling to distance themselves from the failed coalition that had challenged human expansion. Some offered tribute, others proposed trade agreements, and a few simply withdrew their forces to the farthest reaches of their territory and hoped the humans would ignore them. On Earth, in the secure chambers beneath Geneva, the human high command was dealing with their own problems. Victory had brought new challenges, and Admiral Elena Vasquez found herself at the center of debates that would shape the future of human civilization. We cannot simply expand without limits, argued Dr. Sarah Chun, the civilian representative to the military council. Every system we claim, every world we colonize, brings us into conflict with established civilizations. We're creating enemies faster than we can defeat them. General Morrison, commander of the Marine Corps, disagreed. We've demonstrated our capabilities. The galaxy knows what happens to those who challenge us. This is our opportunity to claim the territory we need for expansion while our enemies are still in shock. Admiral Vasquez studied the holographic star map that dominated the center of the chamber. Red zones marked human territory, blue indicated neutral or allied space, and yellow showed potential expansion areas. But, increasingly, the map was dominated by gray zones, areas where alien civilizations had simply vanished. Their populations fled to unknown regions rather than risk another encounter with human forces. What about the refugee situation? She asked. Dr. Martinez, head of the Xenological Studies Department, activated a secondary display showing population movement patterns. Massive displacement events across 17 sectors. Conservative estimates suggest over 2 billion sentient beings have abandoned their homeworlds in the past 3 months. They're creating pressure on resources throughout the galaxy. Where are they going? Anywhere we're not. The Andromeda Passage has seen a 10-fold increase in traffic. Some are heading for the galactic rim. Others are trying to reach the neutral zones near the core worlds. Vasquez felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Every decision they made now would echo through history, shaping not just humanity's future, but the fate of every species in the galaxy. What's the status of our deep space monitoring stations? Captain Torres stepped forward, his expression grim. We're detecting unusual activity in the void sectors, Admiral. Long-range sensors are picking up massive construction projects, energy signatures that don't match any known technology. Aliens building something? Unknown. The signatures are too distant and too heavily shielded for detailed analysis. But whatever they're building, it's big. Estimates suggest structures the size of small moons. The chamber fell silent. Everyone present understood the implications. If the surviving alien civilizations were pooling their resources to build something that large, it could only mean they were preparing for another conflict. General Morrison leaned forward. "Admiral, I recommend we authorize a preemptive strike. Send a battle group to investigate these construction sites and eliminate any potential threats." "No," Dr. Chun said firmly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that got us into this situation. We can't solve every problem with violence." "Violence has served us pretty well so far," Morrison replied coldly. "Has it? We've become the monsters that every species in the galaxy fears. Children on 1,000 worlds have nightmares about humans coming to destroy their homes. Is that really the legacy we want?" Admiral Vasquez held up her hand for silence. "Both of you raise valid points. We need more information before we make any decisions. Marcus, what's the status of the Indomitable?" Captain Marcus Chun appeared on the main communication screen, his image transmitted from his ship's position on the edge of the exclusion zone. Behind him, the bridge of his vessel hummed with quiet activity as his crew monitored the galaxy for threats. "All quiet on our end, Admiral. We've had a few diplomatic overtures, ambassadors requesting safe passage, trade negotiations, that sort of thing. Nothing hostile. What about your assessment of alien military capabilities?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Most of the surviving fleets are in disarray. Command structures are broken, supply lines disrupted. But there are still significant forces out there, Admiral. The hegemony's core worlds are heavily fortified, and intelligence suggests they're developing new weapons technologies. Based on our designs. Possibly. We know they recovered some debris from the Kalos battle before the artificial black hole collapsed. They've had 3 months to analyze it." Vasquez nodded grimly. It was inevitable that their technology would eventually be copied or adapted. The question was whether alien scientists could understand the principles behind human weapons well enough to create effective countermeasures. "Any word from our diplomatic missions?" "Mixed results. About half the species we've contacted are willing to negotiate. The other half have either fled their territory or gone into complete isolation. The Nexari have actually asked for our protection. Apparently, they're being pressured by refugee populations seeking new homes." This was another complication. As the galaxy's balance of power shifted, smaller civilizations found themselves caught between human expansion and the chaos caused by mass population movements. Some saw alliance with humanity as their only hope for survival. "Admiral," Dr. Martinez interjected, "we're receiving reports of civil wars breaking out in several sectors. The displacement of so many populations is causing resource conflicts. Some species are fighting among themselves for control of remaining habitable worlds. The unintended consequences of their victory were spreading like ripples through the galaxy. Every action had reactions. Every decision created new problems that demanded new solutions." "Ma'am," Captain Torres added, "there's something else. We've intercepted communications suggesting that some of the refugee populations are organizing. They're calling themselves the Coalition of the Displaced, and they're actively seeking alliance partners to oppose human expansion." General Morrison snorted. "Let them organize. We've already demonstrated what happens to coalitions that oppose us." "This is different," Torres continued. "These aren't military forces seeking conquest. These are desperate populations fighting for survival. They have nothing left to lose." Admiral Vasquez understood the distinction. Military forces could be defeated, but desperate populations? They fought with a ferocity that had nothing to do with technology or tactics. History was full of examples where technologically superior forces had been worn down by determined resistance. "Recommendations?" she asked. Dr. Shin leaned forward. "We need to start thinking beyond military solutions. Humanitarian aid, peaceful coexistence, maybe even territorial concessions in exchange for stability." "You want us to give up worlds we've claimed?" Morrison demanded. "I want us to avoid a situation where every species in the galaxy sees us as their mortal enemy. We can't conquer the entire galaxy, General. Even if we could, we don't have the population to hold it." She was right, and everyone in the room knew it. Humanity numbered less than 50 billion souls across all their worlds. The galaxy contained trillions of sentient beings representing hundreds of different species. Simple mathematics made galactic conquest impossible. "What about selective expansion?" suggested Admiral Chen from his ship. "We identify systems that are uninhabited or sparsely populated, establish colonies there, and leave the major alien civilizations alone unless they threaten us directly." "And how do we determine what constitutes a threat?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Every new technology, every military exercise, every trade agreement between alien species could potentially be seen as preparation for conflict with us." The debate continued for hours, with no easy answers emerging. The galaxy had been thrown into chaos by humanity's demonstration of power, and now they faced the challenge of establishing some kind of stable order that didn't require constant warfare. As the meeting was winding down, Captain Torres received an urgent communication. His face paled as he read the message. "Admiral," he said quietly, "we've got a problem. Long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet moving toward the exclusion zone. Configuration unknown. Technology signatures unlike anything in our database. Size of the fleet. Initial estimates suggest over 50,000 ships, ma'am. And they're big. Some of these vessels are reading as larger than anything we've ever encountered." The chamber fell silent. 50,000 ships was 5 times larger than the coalition fleet they had destroyed at Kalos. If these were hostile forces, time to arrival? At current velocity, approximately 6 weeks. Admiral Vasquez turned to the star map, her mind racing through possibilities. A fleet that size could only have come from the galactic core, where the oldest and most powerful civilizations made their home. Species that had remained neutral during the Kalos conflict, watching from the sidelines as the younger races threw themselves against human defenses. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All available ships to rendezvous with the Indomitable, and activate the Deep Space Monitoring Network. I want to know everything about this new fleet, who they are, what they want, and what they're capable of." "Ma'am," General Morrison asked, "should we authorize use of Protocol 7 if they prove hostile?" Vasquez hesitated. Protocol 7 had ended the last conflict decisively, but it had also demonstrated a level of destructive power that had terrified the entire galaxy. Using it again might solve their immediate problem, but it would also confirm every alien species' worst fears about human intentions. "Not yet," she said finally. "Let's see what they want first. Maybe diplomacy will work this time." But even as she spoke the words, Vasquez was already making mental preparations for another battle. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and humanity had learned that survival often depended on being more dangerous than anything else out there. The next 6 weeks would determine whether humanity's future lay in conquest or coexistence. Either way, Admiral Vasquez intended to make sure her species survived whatever was coming. 6 weeks later, Captain Marcus Chin stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, staring at a display that showed something unprecedented in galactic history. The alien fleet had arrived exactly on schedule, and it was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. 50,000 ships hung in perfect formation just outside the Terran exclusion zone. But these weren't the sleek warships they had faced before. These vessels were ancient beyond measure, their hulls bearing the scars of eons spent traversing the void between stars. Some were so large they dwarfed entire moon systems, mobile habitats that could house billions of beings. "Analysis?" Chen asked quietly. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim consulted her instruments with a puzzled expression. "Sir, I'm reading minimal weapons signatures. Most of these ships appear to be civilian vessels, colony ships, habitat modules, mobile factories. The few military escorts are maintaining defensive positions only. Any communications? They've been broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies for the past hour. The message is simple. They request permission to enter human space for the purpose of negotiation." Chen nodded slowly. This wasn't what they had expected. Intelligence had suggested another military coalition, perhaps led by the ancient powers from the galactic core. Instead, they faced what appeared to be a massive refugee flotilla. "Signal Admiral Vasquez. Tell her we have contact." The response came within minutes. Admiral Elena Vasquez appeared on the main screen, her face showing the strain of the past weeks. Behind her, the Emergency Command Center buzzed with activity as humanity's leadership grappled with this new development. Marcus, what's your assessment? It's not an invasion fleet, Admiral. These appear to be refugees, multiple species, civilian vessels, minimal military escort. But the scale is enormous. Conservative estimates suggest over 1 billion sentient beings aboard those ships. Vasquez closed her eyes briefly. 1 billion refugees seeking entry to human space was a humanitarian crisis beyond anything they had ever imagined. But it was also potentially a trap, a way for hostile forces to infiltrate human territory under the guise of seeking aid. Any word on who's leading this flotilla? Yes, ma'am. They're requesting to speak with our highest authority. The leader identifies himself as, well, the translation software is having trouble with the name. Something like Keeper of the Final Archive or Guardian of Last Knowledge. Species? Unknown. The linguistic patterns don't match anything in our database. Admiral Vasquez made her decision. Grant them safe passage to Station 7. I'll meet with their leadership personally. Station 7 was a diplomatic facility constructed specifically for first contact situations. Located in neutral space between human and alien territories, it was designed to allow for secure meetings while minimizing the risk to either party. The station's defensive systems were formidable, but its primary purpose was communication, not warfare. 3 days later, Admiral Vasquez found herself in the station's main conference chamber, waiting for representatives of the massive refugee fleet. The room had been designed to accommodate a wide variety of alien physiologies, with adjustable gravity, atmosphere, and lighting systems. The doors opened, and Vasquez got her first look at the beings who had traveled from the far side of the galaxy to seek humanity's aid. The leader was unlike any alien she had ever seen. Tall and ethereal, it seemed to be composed of crystalline structures that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. Its form shifted constantly, as if it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When it spoke, the words came not from any visible mouth, but from the air itself. I am Zephyl, Keeper of the Final Archive, the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in Vasquez's mind. I speak for the coalition of the displaced, the survivors of worlds that can no longer sustain life. Admiral Elena Vasquez, representing the United Earth Systems, she replied formally. You've brought quite a fleet to our borders, Zephyl. What do you seek from humanity? Safety, Zephyl replied simply. And, perhaps, if we prove worthy, the chance to learn from the species that has mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. Behind Zephyl, a dozen other aliens stood in respectful silence. Vasquez recognized a few species from intelligence reports, Deltarian refugees, surviving Corvan nobles, even what appeared to be a Zephyrian diplomat. But others were completely unknown, beings from the deep reaches of space that had never made contact with known civilization. You call yourself the coalition of the displaced, Vasquez said carefully. What displaced you? Zephyl's crystalline form shifted, taking on darker hues. The same thing that has displaced billions across the galaxy, Admiral. Fear of your species' expansion. When word spread of what happened at Kalos, entire civilizations abandoned their homeworlds rather than risk a similar fate. The words hit Vasquez like a physical blow. She had known their victory would have consequences, but seeing the results in person was something else entirely. These weren't enemy soldiers or hostile aliens. They were families, children, elderly beings who had fled their homes in terror. And you've come to us because running is no longer an option, another voice said. The speaker was a Corvan female, her massive frame scarred by what looked like combat injuries. I am General Thyss Era, formerly of the Corvan Dominion military. My homeworld was destroyed in the civil wars that followed Kalos. My people are scattered across the galaxy, fighting for resources with other refugee populations. We cannot survive this way. Admiral Vasquez felt the weight of galactic history settling on her shoulders. Humanity had wanted to secure their territory and ensure their survival. Instead, they had destabilized an entire galaxy. What do you propose? Zephyl stepped forward, its form brightening with what might have been hope. An alliance, Admiral. Not the kind built on fear or conquest, but one based on mutual benefit. We offer you knowledge accumulated over millions of years of galactic civilization. Science, art, philosophy, technology, the combined wisdom of 100 species. In exchange for territory, safe worlds where our peoples can rebuild their civilizations, protection from the chaos that now consumes the galaxy, and, most importantly, the chance to coexist with the species that has proven itself the ultimate survivor. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. An alliance with this coalition would fundamentally change humanity's relationship with the galaxy. No longer would they be seen as conquerors, but as protectors of displaced civilizations. "You're asking us to become the galactic police force," she said finally. "We are asking you to become what you have already shown yourselves to be," Zephyl replied. "The most powerful military force in known space. The question is whether you will use that power to create order or chaos." The negotiations continued for days. Representatives from dozens of species presented their cases, offering technologies and knowledge that could advance human civilization by centuries. Anti-gravity generators from the Nexari, biological computers from the Quellians, energy matter conversion systems from species so ancient they remembered the formation of the galaxy itself. But it wasn't the technology that convinced Vasquez to recommend acceptance of the alliance. It was a conversation she had with a young Deltarian refugee named Kesslin. The child, for that's what it was, despite being 2 meters tall, had been separated from its family during the evacuation of their homeworld. It now lived aboard one of the refugee ships with hundreds of other orphan younglings from a dozen different species. "Do you hate humans?" Vasquez asked gently, using a translation device that rendered her words in the child's native language. Kesslin tilted its insectoid head, considering the question with the seriousness that only children could manage. "No," it said finally. "I hate war. I hate being afraid. Humans didn't make the war. Humans ended it." The simple wisdom of that statement stayed with Vasquez long after the conversation ended. Humanity hadn't created the galaxy's problems, but their actions had forced everyone to confront the consequences of millennia of conflict and competition. When she returned to Earth to present the alliance proposal to the High Command, Vasquez found the leadership divided. General Morrison argued for maintaining humanity's isolation, claiming that accepting refugees would only invite infiltration and eventual betrayal. Dr. Chen pushed for full acceptance, seeing it as humanity's chance to become a truly galactic civilization. The debate raged for weeks, with politicians, scientists, and military leaders all weighing in. Public opinion was split, with some humans fearing the loss of their species' unique identity, while others embraced the chance to learn from advanced alien civilizations. In the end, it was Captain Marcus Chun who provided the deciding argument. Speaking via secure transmission from the Indomitable, he addressed the assembled leadership with the calm authority that had made him humanity's most respected military commander. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we've proven that we can destroy any enemy that threatens us. The question now is whether we can build something better than what we've torn down. The galaxy is watching. History is watching. This decision will define not just humanity's future, but the future of galactic civilization itself." The vote was closer than Admiral Vasquez had hoped, but the alliance proposal passed. Within days, ships began arriving at designated systems throughout human space. Refugee populations were settled on carefully selected worlds, with human oversight ensuring that conflicts between different species were minimized. The integration wasn't easy. Cultural differences led to misunderstandings, competition for resources caused tensions, and some humans continued to view the aliens with suspicion. But, gradually, a new kind of civilization began to emerge. Human military technology provided security, while alien knowledge advanced human science by leaps and bounds. Corvin engineers worked alongside human designers to create ships that combined the best of both technologies. Quellian computers integrated with human AI systems to solve problems that neither species could handle alone. Most importantly, the galaxy began to stabilize. The massive population displacement slowed as refugee species found new homes under human protection. Trade resumed between systems, and the constant threat of war began to recede. 5 years after the Battle of Kalos, Admiral Vasquez stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching ships from a dozen different species docking at the expanded facility. Her hair was grayer now, her face more lined with the weight of responsibility, but her eyes still held the determination that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. "Status report," she said to Captain Torres, who had become her chief of staff after Captain Chen accepted command of the new multi-species defense force. "All systems stable, Admiral. The Nexary colonies are reporting successful harvests. The Corvin industrial complexes are operating at full capacity. Even the Zephyrian cultural centers are beginning to attract visitors from other species. Any security concerns? Minor incidents only. A trade dispute between the Deltarians and the Palaxians, but nothing that can't be resolved through normal diplomatic channels. The deep space monitoring stations report no hostile fleet movements." Vasquez nodded, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. It had taken 5 years, but they had done it. They had built a galactic civilization that was stable, prosperous, and based on cooperation rather than conquest. "Ma'am," Torres continued, "there's one more thing. Long-range sensors have detected signals from beyond the galactic rim. It appears that word of our alliance has reached other galaxies. We're receiving what appear to be diplomatic overtures from civilizations in Andromeda." Vasquez smiled, thinking of young Captain Patterson, who had once asked if they should call for reinforcements when facing impossible odds. Humanity had started this journey fighting alone against overwhelming forces. Now they stood at the head of a galactic alliance that had turned former enemies into partners. "Signal our response," she said. "Tell them the United Galactic Alliance welcomes contact with peaceful civilizations. And prepare our diplomatic corps for first contact with extragalactic species." As Torres moved to carry out her orders, Vasquez turned back to the observation port. Somewhere out there, Captain Marcus Chun was patrolling the borders of human space aboard the Indomitable, still vigilant after all these years. The ship that had faced down impossible odds and emerged victorious had become a symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender in the face of adversity. But more than that, it had become a symbol of hope for the entire galaxy. Proof that even the greatest conflicts could be resolved not through the complete destruction of one's enemies, but through the patient work of building something better. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and terrors that humanity was only beginning to understand. But for the first time in galactic history, all its civilizations were working together toward a common future. And at the center of that alliance stood humanity, no longer the primitive species that aliens had once dismissed, but the guardians of galactic peace. Admiral Vasquez closed her eyes and allowed herself to dream of what the next 100 years might bring. New worlds to explore, new species to meet, new challenges to overcome. But whatever came, humanity would face it not alone, but surrounded by allies who had learned to trust in their strength and wisdom. The age of human conquest was over. The age of human leadership had begun.